I have had an incredible burst of inspiration. Pots! Or actually, I have been using pots kind of generally throughout my playthrough, and I noticed that people aren't using them. These pots are a throwable item, right? They have all kinds of effects that you can power up to spend FP on, to get all kinds of elements, to do status build up, to attack the weakness of certain enemies, to blow up environmentals. There's a lot of pots in this game. There's a whole tab for crafting them. And there's different types. You got the crack pots, you got the ritual pots, you got the rope pots. With these, we can build up status of many kinds without actually needing a build for it. We can benefit from elemental damage without splitting our damage of our weapon to achieve the same thing. And elements have a wide array of benefits. We can throw fire pots to blow up the red barrels, which can catch out enemies that are trying to ambush you. Fire pots can even stun enemies. Specific types that are really weak to fire, like the annoying giant hand enemies who take any bit of fire and then will be full stunned and take loads of damage. Sleep is obviously an incredible tool in Elden Ring, letting you get a free critical hit on a slept target. Or you can just CC that target for a while, which is ideal in a duo boss fight like, yeah, the Godskin duo. I don't even need to explain to you why bleed is broken currently and how throwing bleed at your enemies is pretty good. Further than that, many enemies are weak to specific statuses or elements. We could poison enemies, we can rot them, instant kill enemies that are weak to maybe lightning or holy. If you throw a holy pot at a skeleton, it will not revive. So yeah, thanks to crafting, we can make all of these things, giving us the opportunity to run status in any build and any element in any build, with extra benefits like the jar helmet headpiece, which will boost the power of your thrown pot items, and of course the companion jar talisman, which will do the same but even better. So hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Olo, and today we're of course talking about pots and why you really should be using them and how to do that best. Let's start with an explanation of pots in general and how they work in the different types. So if you do some item crafting, you can go to the pot tab, or the throwing pots tab, and you can see all of the ones that you currently have. If you aren't aware, pots and the recipes to make them come from the various cookbooks around the world. There's the nomadic warrior cookbooks, the armorers, you got the glintstone versions, the missionaries. You can even check which recipe gives you what, like, hey, we get the sleep pot from the furthest cookbook 1 by looking at the item description. That sleep pot requires mushrooms and Trina's lilies. It will cost us 9 FP to use each pot, and it scales with arcane. Not all pots do scale with something. So depending on what you're running, like, hey, the fire pot scales with strength and dex, you're going to get more potency on those pots. Now, as I said, they come in 3 types. We have cracked pot pots, and we have ritual pot pots. And lastly, we have the roped version. Now, your regular pots are just going to be thrown and aimed. You can free aim like I am, or you can target like targeting an enemy and then auto lock onto them, like any thrown thing. Ritual pots are the same, but sometimes cost FP and are generally stronger. And then your roped pots are kind of an interesting one. They are thrown behind you, like so, dropped like a mine for an enemy that is chasing you. Imagine you're being run down by a bunch of dogs or those annoying birds. A roped pot behind you could be really useful. Pots generally cost mushrooms and something else to make, sometimes multiple things, sometimes a unique resource depending on what you're actually looking at, be it status or element usually. Rope pots require the same resources as the original, but it'll also need a piece of string to actually serve as the rope. Lastly, as I mentioned, there are 2 types of pots, right? Crack pot and ritual pots. These are basically containers that are required to make specific types. You can't make crack pot items if you don't have any crack pots. As an example, crack pot items are generally damage or status build up, but they can be quite interesting, like the swarm pot here. Much like the incantation, the swarm of blood flies, well, this pot allows me to throw that swarm. Looks exactly the same. Any enemies within that will be taking bleed status and hopefully get a bleed proc. Whereas this ritual pot item is much more unique and unusual. I can throw this at enemies and it'll douse them in this accursed blood, meaning whoever's hit by this will be targeted by my summon spirits, letting me choose who my summon focuses in a fight. I can have up to 15 pots at once, these crack pots. That's because I bought or found 15 crack pots. I could have up to 20 if I found all of them. Ritual pots, you can have up to 10. I currently have 7, so I can currently max have 7 ritual pots at once. Let's take a look at some of my favorite pots to use in general gameplay, starting with a volcano pot. So volcano pot, you throw it, and then it generates this sort of mist that if an enemy stands in, as you can see, it takes fire damage and it burns them over time. That's particularly good against, say, an Erd tree. Rancor pots are really interesting. We throw it, and it sends out those ghosts, those spirits. And it does pretty solid burst damage. As you can see, I can kind of just throw it out easily. As shown earlier, the swarm pot is our ranged bleed option. So we throw it and it starts doing bleed status. 1 pot's not quite enough, but 2 pots is more than enough. Of course, every pot that we throw scales with specific stuff. So in the case of the swarm pot, the higher your arcane, the faster that's going to bleed. Lastly, the sleep pot, the classic iconic sleep effect. Just 1 pot thrown. I don't have the stats for it, and he's gone to sleep, which gives me, naturally, a very easy critical. Or we could use that to CC multiple targets to make a duo fight or multi-target situation easier. Another really useful pot then is the holy pot. Let's spawn in a quick skeleton boy. All right, so when you kill a skeleton, what happens is it goes down, but then as you can see, it has a light that glows, and if you do not kill it again, it will revive, so you have to kill it again and again and again. Very annoying. So as you can see, as I hit it when it's down, it actually dies and it will not come back. But we can speed up that process with holy pots. Look at the damage that does. It's ridiculous. And as you can see, the whole body is evaporated by that holy mist, cleansing them completely. No time to revive. One of my favorite pot types is the simple fire pot because of the sheer power of explosive barrels and fire in general. So what I can do is just throw the fire pot and it's going to blow up the barrels, killing the enemies that are usually so annoying, like these firebirds. These red barrels are all over the place and usually signal ambushes. Like, for example, over here, there's a bunch of fire barrels. If I walk into that, it's not going to be good for me. But one single fire pot later, ambush cleared. Or we, of course, have the dreadful hands, which are weak to fire. As you can see, that's a regular fire pot. Absolutely took out half of its health. Just a single fire pot there. Perhaps one of the best status build-ups you can consider with a pot, then, is the freezing pot. I mean, with just one simple throw, I can get the frost status on an enemy, which means their stamina regenerates slower, and now they just take more damage from all sources, which is very nice. Throw that on a boss fight, maybe you make it easier for yourself. Or one of the rarer statuses that you can get your hands on, the rot status, which can be very expensive to get normally. 1 rot pot there, 1 rot pot throw, and we have the rot status on an enemy here. But my question is, why would we choose? We can literally just throw a rot pot, get the scarlet rot, throw a fetid pot, and get the poison. And now that damage that's doing damage over time, it's double the speed, and it's really just 1 pot throw, maybe 2 if it's got a lot of resistance. You know, normally people are doing builds to make this happen for themselves. You really can just throw a pot, and it works really well. I mean, this giant is just dying. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there are a couple ways you can increase the damage of your pots if you want to do that. Firstly, and obviously, we have the jar helmet, which I'm wearing. This increases the power or potency of your thrown pot items by about 10 to 15%. We are presented with this jar by Alexander during his long quest line. Near the Seathwater Terminus Grace, he is kind of basking himself in the flames to heal and make himself stronger. That's when he gives you the helmet. Second to that is the companion jar, which will of course raise the potency of your thrown jars by something around 20%, even better than the helmet, although of course they do stack. This is part of the jar bug quest line, which requires you to have completed the Alexander storyline, but at the end of that quest line you can of course get this talisman. So if you want to increase the power of your thrown pots, you can. So if this video does anything for you, I hope that it encourages you to use these items, man. There are so many types, so many possibilities, so many interesting interactions between these elements and statuses against certain enemies, and honestly, you can't get these special effects from any other source in some cases. The Cursed Blood Pot, where you can have your summons target a specific enemy, is incredibly cool. If you're invading, you could use the Albinoric pots to prevent your target from actually healing with flasks. There's a lot of potential, a lot of possibility, and so I encourage you to experiment and try it out because it's pretty cool. If you found the video useful or interesting, please drop a like so we can make more in the future. But for now, I've been Pot Hollow, you've been Pot You, and I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.